Some weeks ago, I did two videos that addressed the change in our society that is pushing what I call the trans agenda. This is the belief that men, upon their proclamation without any scientific proof or changes to their body of a surgical nature, can proclaim themselves to be a woman, and that women would be forced to allow these individuals into their personal and private spaces, such as locker rooms, dressing rooms, and restrooms. This has caused some concern, as now this movement has pushed into the public school system, and parents without any knowledge or consent are having their children trained and programmed into accepting the trans movement's belief that there are such things as men with vaginas and women with penises. This is what's going on. There's also a lot of drugs being given to children to halt their development as they are supposed to be progressing through puberty as a part of their adolescence and growth into teens and adulthood. They're being given these drugs that are off-label use, and it's changing their bodies, and sometimes with the concern that this is forever, unknown damage, unknown risk. None of this is all an experiment on your children. This whole thing is an experiment. So what I did was ask for experts in this field, for people to recommend names to me. Some came through. A few I reached out to, I wasn't able to make contact with them, or we couldn't line up our schedules. But I did manage to hook up an interview with Stephani Davies-Arai, and what follows is the half-hour or so discussion that we had about the trans movement, the trans agenda, and its impact on our children. I think this is very important information, especially if you are a parent and this may be something that you have to deal with personally, or that your child will have to deal with as a peer in their school or in their social circle. So this is good information for everyone to have. There are also some recommendations for websites and other resources for medical professionals that you can find, which we will put in the show description below. Please enjoy this discussion, and I welcome your comments below. Thank you for listening. Okay, it's recording. Well, everyone, this lovely lady on the screen here is Stephani Davies-Arai. Arai. She's a communication skills expert and a parenting consultant, a teacher, trainer, a writer, a speaker, and a women's rights campaigner. Her name was recommended to me after the trans videos that I did because of her work on transgendertrend.com. And she's done a lot of research on children and the impact of this trans movement on young people. She also contributed a chapter to the best-selling book, Transgender Children and Young People, Born in Your Own Body, published by Cambridge Scholars. So I invite you to, I'll be putting up the links to her website, transgendertrend.com, and then of course the one with her name on it. And we'll put that up on the end of the slide so you can click them at the end of this interview. Did I leave anything out? Is there anything else you would like to say?
That's fine. That's introduced me.
Well, I wanted to, you came highly recommended from several different people that said, you got to talk to this woman about what's going on with the children and the impact that the trans movement is having on them, and how they're trying to push to have it in schools. So I wanted to start by asking you about the drugs that the children are being given, these things called puberty blockers. It seems to be growing in popularity for this off-label use. And I wanted to get your take on that.
Yes, GnRH analogs is what they are. They're basically anti-cancer drugs. So they were developed, anti-cancer, yeah. They were developed to treat late-stage prostate cancer in men. So they are, they're all used on label for that treatment. What they do is they overstimulate the pituitary gland, and that causes it to shut down. It causes it to shut down the production of gonadal testosterone production in males, and it causes a kind of pseudo-menopause in females. So they're used to treat prostate cancer and also to overstimulate the ovaries as part of fertility treatment in women. And they have been used for decades to treat precocious puberty. So in that use, it's mostly girls who are treated for precocious puberty.
Can you explain what that is, though, for listeners who may be unfamiliar with that term?
If a girl starts puberty at age 6 or 7, you know, sometimes even age 5, then these drugs are given to suppress puberty.
Okay.
And when we're quoted research and told that these drugs are completely safe, that's based on use for precocious puberty. So one thing is, actually, there is evidence which is recently coming from the US, which shows that there are long-term serious health effects on some women who were given these puberty blockers for precocious puberty. So muscle and bone fatigue, depression, weakness, those sorts of long-term issues. So that evidence has only recently, last year, been emerging from the States. So that's one thing. The other thing is that using drugs for precocious puberty, once you stop puberty blockers, it takes about a year for puberty to resume. So these very young children resume puberty at the normal age that you would start puberty. So in girls, that's around 10, maybe even 10, 11, 12. For boys, it tends to be 1 or 2 years later.
Okay.
The problem is, if you're using, there are no studies on these drugs used for normal starting puberty. So
that's what I was wondering. So they're normally treated for someone who's suffering from an affliction, but now they're giving it to normal, healthy children with like no studies.
Yeah, I mean, they're administered for what is seen as a physical problem, you know, the early onset of puberty, and, you know, that can create physical problems and you know, later in life. So there is a reason for using those drugs in you know, early onset puberty, although I think there are some issues with that as well. But when you use the drugs for normal puberty, when there are no physical problems, and we're told that they're completely reversible and they have no effect, and they're just used to buy time. In other words, they completely block a child's pubertal development, so sexual maturation.
So in other words, it's keeping them in a childlike state.
A childlike state. And in fact, what we're seeing is that once a child goes on to this medical pathway, they don't change their minds. There have been studies out of the States and Holland showing 100% stay on puberty blockers until age 16 and then progress to cross-sex hormones. In the UK, it's over 90% at the Tavistock Gender Clinic. So there are huge concerns that once, and of course, you're expecting children to make a decision when they're still really children. We know that the children who come to terms with the sex they were born, that tends to happen during puberty, because that sexual development, it changes you, it changes your brain, it changes your understanding of yourself. So if we block that chance for children to develop and change, then it's sort of inevitable, really, that more children will not change their minds, they will stay. But the issue of it being, these drugs being completely reversible, there is no evidence, because one, so few children come off puberty blockers once they start, that there have been no, you know, the number of children who stop is too small to do proper clinical trials, so we haven't got the evidence. But also, if you think of a child, say, at age 10, because it's that's around Tanner stage 2 of puberty that puberty blockers are administered. and that means just when the first signs of puberty are becoming apparent. So that child starts puberty blockers at age 10. 5 years later, say age 15, thinks, oh, I made a mistake, and goes off puberty blockers. Well, that child has missed the window for puberty. A puberty starting at age 15 is not the same as a puberty that would have naturally started at the age of 10.
Exactly.
So we're looking at the example of Jazz Jennings, for example, in the US, is a boy who took puberty blockers, is now age 16 and has the genitals of a toddler. Now, if Jazz decided at this age, no, I won't go on to cross-sex hormones, I will stop, I made a mistake, will Jazz's penis develop into a fully male-sized, adult male-sized penis? We don't know. It seems unlikely, but we don't know because we haven't tested this. So it seems that once we start, we also don't know the effects on the developing adolescent brain. So puberty, what happens at puberty is the release of sex hormones triggers the enormous changes in the adolescent brain at puberty. Now, if those sex hormones are blocked until the age of 16, when the opposite sex hormones are introduced, what does that do to the developing adolescent brain? Because there are enormous changes, really crucial changes going on in the brain at that time. We don't know the answer to that question. So we're really, this is a real experiment. We have no data because this is so recent that we don't have any long-term studies.
What's convincing parents that this is a good option for their children and this is something that makes sense?
Because I think of the enormous sort of propaganda around trans kids, and if you can look at the media, you can look at transgender organizations and the power that they have had. It's a real political movement. It's not a health movement.
Right.
It's a political movement. And so it's a sort of, it's framed as a human rights movement, and it's linked to LGB, so lesbian, gay, bisexual. We think, well, we have to protect the rights of these sexual minority groups, but transgender is something completely different. We accept, and you know, somebody who has same-sex orientation is a different thing to accepting that a boy is literally a girl and needs to therefore change their body irreversibly to achieve the cosmetic appearance of the opposite sex. That's a completely different thing.
Right, I agree. What is it that's giving, I mean, this just amazes me that, you know, children can't vote. They can't buy cigarettes. They can't go in bars. They can't buy liquor. They can't sign contracts. They can't get married. All of these parameters we have around youth to protect them, but suddenly a 4 or 5 year old can make a decision that impacts their body for the rest of their life.
And essentially they are making that decision because we know that they don't tend to come off the medical pathway once they start. It could be at age 10, 11 or 12. They are making the decision to be infertile because if they take puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2 and then progress to cross-sex hormones at age 16, they are infertile because eggs or sperm have not developed. So essentially they're making the decision. Now, fertility is a human right. We protect that you know, that's sort of we protect that right. So if you're a woman and you try and get sterilized at age 30, you try and do that because the doctors won't allow it. It's like, you might change your mind, you might change your mind.
Exactly.
It's a very jealously guarded human right. And yet with children, we know that they are essentially making this decision at an age when they have just started puberty. And no child has the understanding to really know what they're doing at that age.
Are there some medical professionals that are referring this to referencing this as child abuse, or is everyone in accord?
There are, I think, there are certain professionals who are speaking up about it. Paul McHugh in the States has written very well about the effects of puberty blockers, and is saying that no child should be making that decision until psychosexual development is complete. Now, I think because the teenage brain doesn't finish its development until age 25, and you're looking at a risk-taking brain, a brain that can't weigh up future consequences against.
Right.
So it's not possible at that age. It's also not possible to imagine, you know, being, even if you're a girl, it's not possible to imagine what it is to be a woman. And certainly for a boy, it's not possible to imagine what it's like to be an adult woman and decide that's who I am. Because a child, of course, can only know who they are at the age they are. A 4-year-old boy can only know himself as a 4-year-old boy. A teenage girl can only know herself as a teenage girl. We cannot project, well, none of us really can project into the future and know, but particularly children cannot predict what they will be like as men or women when they're children.
It amazes me that people take this so seriously, because I remember when my daughter was about, I don't know, between, I say 5 and 7, she had this fixation that she was a lion. Now,
Yes.
she would actually go around
Yeah.
and growling at people.
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was the weirdest thing. She grew out of it. I mean, you know, but I'm kind of projecting that if I had believed, say she said, I'm a boy, and with that same fervor, and that she swore up and down that she was a lion, what in the world? To me, it's the same thing. It's just a kid playing a role playing, using their imagination.
Yeah. I do think when we're talking about children, that is a fair analogy, actually, because children do live in a make-believe world, and you know that when a child says, I'm a lion, they mean it. Right. They absolutely mean it. It is reality to a child because they are at the stage of magical thinking. And of course, as adults, we say, yes, you are. You know, we know that stage of childhood, you know, that children do actually believe what they think they are. And they're also logical thinkers, you know, it's or concrete thinkers. So it's literally true, this magical thinking. Right. And I can create with my mind, it is possible to create with my mind a reality. And that's, so, you know, it's a wonderful aspect of being a child. So yes, I think it is a fair, you know, it seems a bit flip, but I think it is a fair enough analogy, actually, to say what a child believes is not necessarily true. And we are encouraged as parents. What I hear a lot, we must listen to our children, and they know who they are. Well, I think it's very important to listen to children, but it doesn't mean we have to believe children and validate their beliefs. We can still disagree with them. We can still, as adults, understand reality and teach our children about reality, while at the same time supporting them. We're given this message that the only way to support a child is to agree and to affirm that their identity is true. And that's actually, if you think about it, it's a very, very extreme reaction to a child. A little boy who says, I'm a girl, and the parent says, yes, you are a girl. That is a really extreme response, because the little boy will never grow up to be an adult woman. That's just reality. And the reality is tough, but that is the reality. But of course, children believe parents, children believe adults. Why wouldn't they? They trust their parents, they trust their teachers. Right. And if every trusted adult is saying, yes, you are a girl, that's, you know, it's so obvious that then that will have a self-fulfilling effect, that the child will believe. But
once the child gets around children, you know, female children that actually are girls and that, you know, identify as girls, and this child sees, hey, I'm not like those girls, what am I? Wouldn't that cause some kind of really serious conflict and emotional disturbance and mental breakdown in this child?
Well, I've heard that parents tell their little boys, some girls have penises. You know, you're just a little girl with a penis. Well, but I mean, that's the logical extension of this ideology, isn't it? If you're biologically male and you're a girl, then girls have penises. I mean, that's what automatically follows.
I see. All right. Well, I was wondering, Also, I was kind of looking at some statistics where a study where a doctor was saying that it's better to, you know, to go along with this because of the high rate of suicides
Yes.
amongst children who are denied the hormones and the sex change operation and all of this. But on the flip side, there seems to be a super high rate of suicide on the for those who actually did transition. So what is going on with that? What are your take on it?
Yes, actually, when you asked me about parents, that's a big thing, and I think this is the key issue, that parents are told that if they don't support their child to transition, then their child has a greater likelihood of committing suicide. So that suicide threat, which I think is the cruelest emotional blackmail that you could possibly give to a parent, because what parent wouldn't do anything to stop their child committing suicide?
Oh yeah.
So I think that message is awful. But there are lots of things around that as well. That the suicide, most of the suicide studies that we see of children cannot be extrapolated into the wider population, because they're self-selecting studies. They're not controlled studies, so they could be. In other words, they don't know who's responding to them.
I see.
They don't know whether the child has pre-existing mental health issues, which would be a major factor. So, for example, in this country, there was a school survey done by Stonewall, and in that survey, again, the high rate, 48% think suicidal ideation in trans kids. What we don't know is how many of those children had coexisting. So there's a high rate of anxiety, depression, self-harm, body hatred, disassociation, particularly amongst teenage girls, which is an unfortunately common occurrence in adolescent teenage girls. We know this.
Right. It's regular, right?
Yes, and now they've got a new way of understanding why they feel that way. You know, I'm really a boy. I hate my body. I hate my developing female body. I must be a boy. You know, they've got a different model of understanding being presented to them. But yes, so the suicidal ideation, there could be lots of reasons behind it. If in this country, and it's the same all over the world, it's around 70% of teenagers presenting to gender identity clinics are girls, and that's a very sudden thing. Yes, it's and this is a completely new phenomenon. In the late 60s, 90% of transsexual adults were male, and now at gender clinics there have been tiny numbers up till around 2009, and then suddenly it sort of shot off the graph, the numbers of children being referred to identity clinics. But yes, it's around 74.5% of teenagers are girls, almost 70% of overall referrals are girls in the UK. That's reflected in Canada, in the US, in Australia, in the Netherlands, everywhere. And this has been termed rapid onset gender dysphoria, because these girls have had no previous indication of any unhappiness, and suddenly they're identifying as transgender. So we don't understand, you know, why.
I have a theory.
Yes, I think we all have theories about why. I mean, it's quite obvious when gender identity has been taught in schools in this country since at least 2008, that children are being taught in school that they have a gender identity which is so strong it overrides biological sex, and gender identity is the real indicator of whether you're a boy or a girl, and not your biology. So
why is this? Do you have any theories about what's behind the push to get this drum this into children's heads, often against the parents' wishes? It's not like a normal school curriculum. You don't get tested for this on the SAT. So, I mean, why is this being pushed in schools?
I think there are a combination of factors. I think there is that feeling that we let down the gay community. We didn't give, you know, same-sex marriage, gay rights. We feel a collective guilt about not recognising the rights of gay people quickly enough, and we're making up for it now by going overboard with trans rights. And I think the trans lobby has really worked hard to, you know, it's now LGBT, it's not L, so that they've really, you know, they're sort of traveling on the coattails of the LGB movement. But I think there are, and I think there's a certain naivety, certainly in government, in the medical profession, in that these people know what they're talking about. These people are the experts, and yet what we're seeing is there are parents of trans kids. There are people who are not experts in child development and psychology. They're not medical experts. They're not researchers or clinicians. They're either parents or they're trans people themselves. And so what we're getting is the experts are people who have a very strong political agenda, and they're influencing education and health. And in fact, we know that out of all the studies of gender dysphoric children from the past, taking all of those studies together, the rate of children who desist from that cross-sex identity is around 80%. So that most children grow out of gender dysphoria during puberty. We also know that a very large proportion of those children will turn out to be gay or lesbian as adults and not transsexual.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah, and this is acknowledged by WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's acknowledged by everybody that that's the most likely outcome. But we're seeing that it's the people who didn't grow out of it, the trans adults, are dictating policy on the treatment of these children. And I wonder why we're not getting people who did grow out of it to have influence on policy towards children. It's almost like getting women who did not grow out of body dysmorphia teaching and dictating treatment for young girls suffering body dysmorphia. You would want you'd want some input from people who grew out
right.
of it.
For a balanced view.
Well, it's the most likely outcome. So trans people themselves, adults, of course, can only see one outcome, trans. That's me when I was a child. So that child will be trans. We cannot say what the outcome will be of any child. We don't know. We know that there's a correlation between the more extreme gender dysphoria. Those kids are more likely to have a transsexual outcome, but even in those cases, children desist. So there's no way of knowing for an individual child whether they will grow out of it or whether they won't.